So my name is Mark Walsh from the Embodied Facilitator course. This is a guide for working with normal people for hippies. Okay, so what do I mean by this? What is this guide? So this guide is a video version of an online book that we have that's freely available if you prefer to read it. Some people like to read, some people like video. This is the video version. What this will do is show you how to work in mainstream environments. This could include business, government, with at-risk youth, with NGOs. I've worked with all of these areas. When I say hippie, please, take that very lightly. It's a bit of a fun term. I mean, anyone who's into alternative type things, that's myself and most of my friends. So for example, I do embodiment, that's my particular area. A lot of work for the martial arts, for meditation. Maybe you come from a dance background or a yoga background or some kind of spirituality background. Arts background even, great, okay? That stuff's all really useful. The world needs it, and it needs to be in a package which people can digest, that people can find accessible, yeah? So for example, if you want to do meditation in business, it has to be approached in a slightly different way than, I don't know, doing the Brighton Buddhist Centre or the Buddha Field Festival, kind of hippie festival in Britain, yeah? So I've been doing that successfully for the last, I've been involved in it for about 15 years, the last 9 years running a full-time company. This has been my sole way of making a living for a number of years. So I've taught meditation in big business like in Unilever or AXA or L'Oreal. I've worked in war zones. I've worked with the military in Ukraine and Sierra Leone. I've worked with humanitarian aid workers like, Save the Children or Oxfam. I've worked with youth in slums. All kinds of people that could be called mainstream or more challenging environments. And I've done some really weird stuff with them, stuff from dance and embodiment and movement. I've done yoga with different people, so I know this can be done. Our first question might be, okay, why would we want to do that? Yeah, why would we want to do that? So I think there's several reasons. One, the world needs it. This work is valuable, and the world is heading rapidly towards a cliff at the moment because of not having the body, mind, soul, emotions, this part being lost. The way it's often packaged isn't really going to cut it in those environments. It's just going to be rejected, yeah? So if we want to help people, and on one level we could just say, well, it's just helping human beings, yeah? It doesn't matter if they're executives or police or whatever, they're just human beings, yeah? So that's one thing. I'd say another big one is money, right? Like, for me, I can fund doing free charity projects or lower paid work with yoga teachers or whatever because I do this. So it creates a lot of financial freedom in my own life, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think getting paid £2,000 for a day with a company wasn't great money. I think it's brilliant. So yeah, that's another reason. Another one for me is challenge. I really like the challenge of it. I deliberately set out to work with some of the hardest groups I could just for the challenge of it. So it's a personal motivator for me, and I've also learned a lot along the way, so learning might be another one. I'm going to look at some notes. I'm actually looking at the ebook I put together here because it's much better structured than my ramblings can. So I've got here the love, the money, the challenge, the world. Yeah, just sharing the love of what you do, and we're all human. So they're the main ones. The next thing we could ask is, why does this book need to exist? Why do I need to be giving a class on this? And people nearly always learn something from this when I do this, so I hope you are. Why would I need to do that? Well, there's a certain set of challenges, yeah? So for example, the fear. If I'm working with the body, people go, oh my God, you're talking about something sexual, or maybe I'm too fat, or so there's fear to overcome, yeah? Another challenge might be language, like using the right words. We'll talk about this later on. If I'm not using the right words, that I won't be accepted, I won't even get the job. Getting through the door can be another challenge, just selling the work to begin with. Cynicism, yeah, so that's a big one. If I work with a group of, say, humanitarian aid workers, they might be quite skeptical, quite cynical, and overcoming that, I'd say, is a big challenge. Another challenge might be time, doing things in a limited time frame, looking at the real benefits that people are going to be getting. All these challenges, the good news is all these challenges become selling points. Once you understand how to work with them, all these challenges become ways to sell this work, ways to get through the door, ways to get the kids in East London to come to your workshop or whatever it is, yeah? Yeah, so working with different boundaries is another one we're going to talk about. And also there's the internal challenges, like keeping your own integrity and values throughout this. It's like, how to do this without selling out. That's what one of my students said. They really liked it because I was able to show them a way of working in business without selling out themselves. And sometimes there's latter problems once you've done this a while, like dealing with the kind of loneliness that can come from this. So that's the basic challenges we're looking at. I'd say the sort of the good news is it's not the 60s. Things have got a lot easier. Even in the 9 years I've run a company, things have got so much easier. Mindfulness has got huge, emotional intelligence. It's just yoga's become like a global phenomenon. So things have got a lot easier. And I'll be teaching, say, in bank in London. I'll say, right, we're going to do some mindfulness training. And half the room will have done it before. So who's meditated before? Half the room have got a Headspace app on their phones or whatever. So things are really changing. Things have got a lot easier. So you kids have it lucky today. You don't know how easy you've got now. There's still big mistakes that can be made, though. Okay, cleaning up your frame. So this is a big one. Before we talk about the specifics of working in these environments, let's look at our own perspective. So I'm sort of taking the mick out of this in the title, like the normies, the normal people. There can be like a sort of snobbery or a sense of us and them. The two big mistakes are making yourself too big or too small. So too small would be like, oh, I have nothing to offer, not having the confidence. Too big would be like, I will teach these people. This is what I was like when I first started working in embodiment in business. I was like, I know so much as an Aikido black belt. They know nothing. There's a real snobbery. And what I learned actually was I had loads to learn, and that attitude just isn't cool. And people smell it, and they don't like it. No one likes being talked down to. So you've got to be really careful of that. A lot of people have what's called shadow, so basically issues, psychological stuff around money, around power, around authority, particularly in the alternative world. And I certainly had to clean that up. I did some therapy and I worked my way through it in different ways. For example, I was brought up that good people aren't rich, rich people aren't good. Well, all of a sudden I'm working with some seriously rich executives, and that kind of little resentment that was there was showing. And I needed to really clear that up. So we've got to be careful of that one. Okay, let's look at ethics. So before we dive into this, and in order to really dive into it full-heartedly, it's important to know your ethics. So who will you not work with? So I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, I was chatting to a HR manager, and they wanted to talk to me. They were in Moscow, and they said, yeah, we're interested in your work. And then it turned out she was from a tobacco company. I didn't know that. They don't always tell you straight away. Yeah, when you get the phone call or the email, it didn't have it wasn't like Marlboro.com. And so I chatted to her, I said, look, you seem like a nice person. I'm not judging you personally. I get that everyone makes the decision to smoke or not smoke. That's their call. But I personally don't work with tobacco manufacturers. There's ethical reasons why not, but it was also like, as a Buddhist, this is against my Buddhist code. It's nice to have a set code that's a bit beyond yourself. You might have a professional ethical code about, I don't know, say not working with family members or whatever, or people you sleep with or whatever, yeah? So having an ethical code of who you won't work with is important. And there's certain industries, for me, like arms manufacturers of tobacco, where it's very clear, and there's other cases where it's more complex, If I'm working with an organization just to make them more efficient, that's different than if it's like deep transformational learning, yeah? So knowing who you won't work with, what you won't do is important. That's also important with time frames, like knowing what to say no. It's very disempowering until you can say no to a corporate client, saying, actually, I need 4 hours to do that. No, I can't do it in a 30-minute lunch break session. Yeah, so those boundaries are important. Okay. Let's look at the big one. So this is maybe the most important one of the whole kind of mini video book. So what, right? You do yoga or meditation or whatever. So what? Who cares? Nobody cares. What is the benefit you bring? Now, it's not enough to say, well, it's different things for different... No. What's the outcome you're going to achieve with the client? Because this is what you're selling. Just from an integrity point of view, if you can't deliver on it, then what are you doing? Taking someone's money and time. That's the big one with a lot of the corporates. You're taking their time. Do not underestimate that one. They might be taking a risk on you, like the HR manager gets you in, and you have to understand the politics of these kind of places. She might be answering to someone and be risk of being embarrassed, and then she has to sell it to the delegates, internal sell. So what benefit are you bringing for that? What are you going to do? And learning to state benefits in language that people, let's say you do stress management course. I've done a lot of those. So I'm doing stress management. It's like, all right, well, so what? What's that going to, well, make you less stressed. All right, good, that sounds good, but so what, yeah? So, okay, but this will reduce the number of sick days your employees have. Oh, okay, now you're talking to the HR manager. Yeah, well, does that speak to the delegates? Maybe. Maybe it's like, well, this will improve your relationship with your wife. You'll stop shouting at your kids. You'll just enjoy your life more, yeah? So what are the actual benefits you're bringing? And this is just great marketing if you have a website, but it's also what you're talking about in the meeting, what you're talking about at the beginning of any training you're doing, for example. So the benefits and speaking to the client's concerns, like what do they care about? Is it the results? Is it the money? What is it, yeah? The beauty for me of this as a practice is it's really about empathy, so you're really trying to understand and listen to and empathize with the client, and it's about non-attachment. You know, it's like we get really attached to our practice, particularly if it's the first one or the only one we've got. If we've just done meditation or dance or yoga or whatever, and get super attached to it, and it's like, this is my thing. So there's a real non-attachment in this of, you know, not dressing up in my Aikido clothes or using Japanese words, letting go of some of that bullshit and just doing what's really helpful to people, yeah? For me, like, you know, the practice here is how can I be a gift, non-attachment, clarity. There's lots of really good spiritual practices in this working with normal people. So don't think of it as like, oh, I have to like dumb down. Actually, for me, there's a great personal growth in this whole process. Yeah, I mean, a big one, we'll look at talking the language next. I think this is another really big one I see people get wrong a lot. My students, we call this in the Embodied Facilitator course, we go into this in a lot more detail. We'll talk about killing unicorns. So unicorns are pieces of language, pieces of jargon, the word unicorn is itself a unicorn, that we use that other people don't understand or actively turn them off. So I have a story about this. I was in Brighton, which is a very kind of hippie place where I live. It's the sort of San Francisco, the Boulder of the UK. And my friend was talking to a guy who was new. He was new to Brighton. And he said, hey man, what kind of space are you in today? And this new guy looked around and went, yeah, like a room? It's a room. He literally didn't get that my friend was saying, like, what emotional space are you in? So this was a bit of a unicorn, to use this phrase, yeah? It can be just like single words, like the word energy turns people off, or saying holding space, or let's ground ourselves. I mean, like, what do you mean by that, right? And a good test, I say, is like run your elevator pitch by your right-wing uncle, or invite an intelligent 10-year-old to your training who's going to put his hand up every time you say something that doesn't make sense, because, you know, that's what 10-year-olds do, right? So video record yourself and just go, okay, what words are funny, weird words? What words would say a bad English speaker not know? That's another test. So you run by these tests, and then you go, right, maybe I don't need to say that. Maybe I could just put this in much clearer, what we call operational language, if you're giving instructions. You can get people to do some weird stuff if you say, look, here's why, that's the aim, the benefit again, here's what we're going to do, here's the benefits you will get from it. The instruction is to sit down and imagine this. Yeah, it's not extend your energy to the four corners of the universe, as I heard one Californian teacher actually say to a group of very pragmatic business coaches. No, it's like, okay, just the word imagine can really help. You know, imagine light coming from you to the four corners of the room and out beyond that. Okay, so it's quite a weird thing you might be doing, but it's very clear pragmatic language. I actually studied HR magazine for 2 years. I subscribed to HR magazine to learn the language of business and learn what an ROI was, or a KPI, or employee engagement. I use all these weird terms now. They're the sort of business unicorns as well. I learned these terms so I could speak the language of my clients. The frame I really like is, imagine you're going to a foreign country. Yeah, so I'm in Russia right now. If you're in Russia, there's certain cultural things that, you know, they speak a different language, they do things slightly differently. You have to understand some of the norms and the cultural norms, what's polite, what's impolite. What I like about this frame is it's not so judgmental, yeah? And we also have our clear values. So there's things in Russia I'll adapt to. You know, I stop smiling at strangers, for example, because that's just considered very weird here. There's also other things I won't adapt to, like, I don't know, a lot of people are quite homophobic in Russia. Not everyone, but quite a lot of people. That's not something I'm suddenly going to, you know, start being homophobic, right? Because there's values we have that are core. And again, when you're working in, say, a business environment, it's important to know what those are so you can have a clear boundary when someone tries to cross those and say, hey, can you do this? And you're like, well, actually, I'm not comfortable with that, yeah? Okay, so what are some of the things that make whatever your weird hippie work is a bit more palatable? So I'll keep using business as an example because it's sort of a classic, but translate to others. One would be to use familiar formats. So for example, if I'm teaching at an alternative festival, I don't use a PowerPoint presentation. But if I'm in business, I might, even if I don't really need to, just because it's familiar, yeah? And it's how I dress, dressing in a familiar way. We say you could be 20% weirder, you might have a kind of a funky shirt or not a tie, but I could get away with what I'm wearing today in pretty much any business in the world. Yeah, I'm comfortable in this now. I'm not, there's a limit for me. I don't like ties or, uncomfortable clothes. I feel good and comfortable in what I wear. And that's part of adapting to the client. So I'm using their language, speaking to their concerns. I'm not coming in with a weird floaty embodiment. Your own embodiment's really important. Think more earth and more fire, for those of you that know my 4 elements model. What else? Champions. So getting someone to introduce you. Maybe it's the nice HR person. Maybe it's the manager who brought you in, or your friend who does yoga and knows you from that. Like getting someone to introduce you, and they'll be really good at using the language of the group and explaining what you do. So those champions are really important. Demos are good. So I like saying to people, don't believe a word I say. Right, so we're not asking them to believe a religion. Most businesses or NGOs, they're very practical. So you say, look, this is useful, but don't believe me, try it. If it's useful, then give it a go. So you're saying, look, you can be skeptical, just don't be cynical. That's another line I use. And people like that. They're like, well, okay, this guy is not asking me to believe a load of bullshit. He's just saying, try something. So I like that approach, and that's a lot from Paul Linden, like testing things. What else? A bit of science. Oh yes, have a slide with a brain and a blob of light on it. Everyone loves that. So a little bit of neuroscience or a little bit of science can be helpful. Here's some research. Got to be careful with that because it can get a bit blaggy. I've seen people go wrong with that where they don't really know like the neuroscience they're talking about, and then someone puts their hand up and says, well, before I got this job as a manager, I did a PhD in neuroscience and you're a complete idiot. The 3-brain theory is completely out of date. So you have to kind of say at the beginning, look, this is a basic thing, or ask if anyone's an expert already, and don't present evidence that's just totally one-sided. Really do know the subject, I would say. But science definitely helps. And for example, with mindfulness, there's lots of great studies out there. It's not hard to find kind of good science on evidence-based for mindfulness. Okay, so a little more on language. I talked about speaking to people's concerns, using clear instructions, getting rid of some of your unicorns. You could also give examples people understand. So I'll say I'm teaching centering. This is a form of state regulation, a way of reducing the fight-flight response. I might say, look, you might have seen this in sports. And I'll use a kind of sports analogy, or the analogy of someone centered they might know from politics. So something famous, something familiar, I think is helpful. Okay, let's look at pricing. Some people say, how do I sell this? Well, to get through the door, that could be the introductions. You could be using Google search. You could be, first clients are often because you know someone or there's a friend or you offer a freebie. But let's say you've gotten through the door. You've managed to make a nice, compelling offer based on benefits. They're going to say, how much? How much? Now, first of all, you've got to deal with your internal stuff around money. I've coached several people on this very issue because it's like, £1,000. No, I mean 500. No, I mean 200. No, so don't do that. Okay, you need to deal with your own stuff around money. I say let them speak first because then you get a ballpark figure. Then add a little bit. So you say, well, what's your budget? And they say £1,000. Say, could you do 1,500? And they say, well, maybe 1,200. So this is basic sort of bartering. Essentially, you're bartering nearly every time with this. If when you say a price, they don't flinch a little bit, say more next time, okay? If you say £1,000, they go, yeah, sure. You go, that for me is like, oh, yeah. The basic rule of capitalism is you ask for as much as possible, and then I would say I'd add to that ethically, like, do you want access? Like, is that price stopping access? For me, in a big business, for example, I have no qualms about charging several £1,000s even for a few hours of work, because I'm like, well, they can afford it, and I know it's going to bring them a lot of benefits, so that money enables me to work with someone else for free who can't afford it, so I don't mind, yeah? So, basic rules of pricing. You can look at what else is there in the market, make sure you're not a commodity. If you're the same as every other mindfulness teacher or corporate yoga teacher, you're just a commodity, and they're going to go for the lowest price. So that's on marketing. We've got loads more on marketing I can teach you. Look at the Purpose Black Belt videos on that. Okay, another absolutely huge one. Let's talk about language, talk about listening to others, talk about your own embodiment, not being all over the place. Super, super simple, but super important. Your word matters. Do what you fucking say. Don't swear, but do what you say. Be on time. most people from alternative communities don't have a really strong sense of integrity. They might think they do, but do you make an excuse when you're late? Do you say, oh, there was traffic or the weather or whatever? It's very easy to do. I was almost late this morning. I was thinking, oh God, it's snow and blah, blah, blah. But no, do you keep your word? Time really matters. I want to be on time, be on time, be on time. I want to say it 3 times because it's, if you cut up to a client meeting with, say, a really busy HR manager and you're even 10 minutes late, you're almost certainly just going to be crossed off as a provider. So that is really important. Keep your word with what you're delivering, in terms of content, in terms of not just timing, but also if you say you'll send everyone a handout, you better do it, yeah? So this business of doing what you say and really honoring your word is massive. I really can't understate it enough. So be on time, keep your word. Okay, let's look at boundaries. So in alternative communities, boundaries tend to be a bit different. It depends which ones, obviously, but if I think of the sort of hippie love fest places I like to hang out, lots of touch, for example. People hug each other, lots of eye contact. Don't do that. Okay, in the average business environment, they're going to feel like you're weird, they're going to feel it's too sexual, you're going to sue you, they could be very touch averse. They might not want to hear your sharing about all your emotions, and when they say, how are you, that might mean, tell me about your emotions and your family and all your problems, or it might just be, well, hello, social ritual, how are you? It's easy to forget that. They might not want to hear about your love life or, personal dramas or all that sort of stuff. So boundaries is a big one. There can be much stricter boundaries and you might be useful. Now, if you're not a therapist or something like that, I know yoga teachers who are like, well, what's wrong with sleeping with your students? What's the big deal? And I'm like, so much. So in terms of boundaries with clients, they can be quite different. Whether you go drinking with them, that might be part of the normal culture, it might not. Hierarchy, a lot of the alternative cultures are quite flat. Everyone gets an equal say and we all sit in a circle. Well, business people I know, a lot of them don't want to sit in a circle. They find it emotionally too confronting. They're scared of their emotions quite often. It's too vulnerable. Just being in your weird stress training is enough of a bravery for them. They're really doing well, So respecting that and not making them be too emotionally exposed, that's a different boundary. Hierarchically, the boss might want to speak first and introduce you. That might be important in the company. Again, there's company cultures, but ones to look out for. There's other stuff around sort of more politically correct kind of companies that, again, if you're coming from an activist background, that might be normal for you. But if you're coming from, say, martial arts, it can be quite blokey, kind of making jokes. You've got to be very careful of that, particularly in North America, but in Europe as well, Western Europe. So with all this, it can seem like, oh God, I have to adapt myself a bit too much. Well, we've already mentioned not adapting yourself past your values, knowing what's core, being a bit weirder, and knowing that you bring something to the party, right? If you didn't, you wouldn't be there. Why would they be paying an outside provider to come in and teach mindfulness if they could do it as well themselves, right? People aren't stupid. So, reminding yourself what you bring to the party. Over time in these environments, it can get a bit soulless. And what I found staying in corporate hotels, for example, is a bit, oh God, and I actually really need to nourish myself. I need to go back to my alternative communities and dance 5 rhythms in Brighton or go on retreat, and that would really feed my soul. And there was a way in which, if you're too successful doing this, it can actually create another set of challenges, and you go, well, what am I doing this for? And what are my values? And feeling drained and all that stuff. So there's problems with success after a while with this stuff as well. So that's another one to watch out for. So remembering what you bring to the party and looking after yourself in this process, because it can be draining to be constantly translating your sort of normal way of speaking into another way. For me, over time, it gets easier and easier, and I've actually almost identifying more with the mainstream world now than I do with the alternative world. That's another weird thing that can happen. After a few years of doing this, I went to my favorite Buddhist festival in Britain, and I just walked through and I was just like, I was so angry with everyone. It just seemed so fake, and it was really strange. I guess I'd grown and I'd kind of saw another side of life, and so that's another thing that can happen, that you might actually feel isolated from your old kind of more alternative friends. So things to be careful of. Okay, so ways to take this further. We have videos on many more of these subjects. Do look at the ebook. This is a slightly fast and furious kind of video version. If you want to go through it, we've got some nice pictures and lists and things like that. If you go to the embodiedfacilitator.com, you will see a link to the free ebook there. We've got videos on a lot more of the things I've been talking about as well, if you look around the YouTube channel. So do subscribe to that. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'm happily answer them. Occasionally I do live talks talks on Facebook. I did one last night actually on this very subject. So yeah, if you find me on Facebook and follow me there, then you'll most likely get into debates and things around this. So I hope that was super useful. Remember, the normal and the hippie thing, don't take too seriously. It's a bit of fun, but also it's important work. For me, bringing this work to mainstream groups, the embodied work that I do, has really improved my life. It's paid my rent. I've met some great people. I've learned a lot. I feel like I've contributed to people's lives all over the world. So yeah, I think we need more of that. So enjoy.